Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Pablo and I'm back with you guys for another video. Today I wanted to talk to you guys, or rather walk you guys through my transcript from my Stanford computer science degree. I figured that this could be particularly useful because when I was starting school, it was hard to get somebody to talk about, or it was hard to know somebody that had already graduated and could walk me quarter by quarter the courses that they took and why. There would be like these Stanford engineering handbooks which would go through sample schedules of what a 4-year plan might look like, but a lot of the times those don't really have any context on why particular courses are taken at particular times or in combination with other courses. So I thought that I could do that here today. I have my computer here and I'm just going to walk through my transcript and mention the classes I took, which quarter I took them, how I did in them, why I took them, and anything that really comes up about those classes. On top of that, I'll make sure to put some screenshots about everything so that way you guys can follow along. So yeah, let's get right into it. So the fall quarter of my freshman year, at this point I wasn't really sure if I wanted to do computer science, but I knew that I wanted to do some sort of engineering degree. I also knew that Stanford had these general education requirements called WAYS requirements. So I figured that as long as I start kind of doing the general engineering stuff and also looking into some WAYS requirements, then I could be on track. Every Stanford freshman has to take some variation of these courses called Thinking Matters. So my Thinking Matters course was this social studies course called The Spirit of Democracy. Back then I was kind of interested in politics a bit. It was like 2016, that election cycle was coming up. So I thought that I would take that class. And it ended up being really pretty interesting. It was nice to be able to have a class that was kind of small. We would divide up into groups and then we'd have like 8 to 10 people in one group and we would all just talk about sometimes current events or whatever our TA wanted us to talk about. And since it was my first quarter there, it was nice to have a group of people where we weren't just like in a big lecture hall and we could get to know each other and start to make a bit of a sense of community. So besides that, I also took Calculus 3. Now this class I remember was like pretty late, from like 4 to 6 p.m. And this was back when I was a freshman, so I was still like, okay, I gotta go to every single class. But I remember it was right before dinner, and by that point I would be hungry and kind of tired. So a lot of the times I kind of fell asleep in class, and I would try to make it up just using the companion reader. But it ended up being okay. One thing I remember from that class was we had our one and only midterm November 1st. And the class before we were supposed to have our midterm, I remember some guy just raised his hand and asked him if he could postpone the midterm. And when the professor asked him why, he just said that it was because he wanted to get lit the day before on Halloween. I remember the professor just kind of looked at him and laughed, but unfortunately the day after we were still taking our midterm. But it's okay, so the class was fine. So yeah, I took my Thinking Matters class, I took Calc 3, and I also took Econ 1. And that also satisfied a general education requirement. So overall, this was my first quarter. It wasn't too busy. It was just 3 classes, I think about 14 units. Yeah, 14 units. And it was good because I didn't want to be too busy since it was my first quarter there, and I wanted to have time to be able to meet new people and to be able to just get involved within my dorm. And so it was a good balance of, this is a full schedule, this is what being busy in college is going to look like, but I also have enough time to go out and meet people and I won't be super overwhelmed. But at the end of the day, it was still everything new, and I had to adjust a little bit, and I did well. I ended up getting 2 A- and 1 B+ that quarter. The B+ was in the Thinking Matters course. And one thing that you guys need to keep in mind is that at Stanford there's a ton of grade inflation, which means that usually the median grade in any class would be anywhere from an A- to a B+, a lot of times even an A. And this is compared to other schools like maybe like the UCs or like UC Berkeley or UCLA or like MIT or maybe some other Ivy League schools like Princeton, where there's a lot of grade deflation, where the median grade might be like a B or a B-. So this means that at Stanford, the average GPA is higher than it might be at other schools. So even though the course itself might be hard, it might be pretty time consuming, usually as long as you do like about as well as your classmates are doing, you can still expect to get like at least a B+. So then moving on to my next quarter, this is when I decided to take the Intro Computer Science course because I saw a lot of my friends, a lot of people in my dorm taking it, and it looked interesting. And so I ended up taking that, and I also ended up taking physics mechanics because for computer science you need to take 2 physics courses. So I wanted to get that out of the way. And I also needed to take one more math course, so this was ordinary differential equations. This quarter was a bit tough because it was 3 full STEM classes. Each class usually had an assignment every week, and this was also winter quarter, and I remember that year we in particular had pretty bad weather. It was raining a lot, and so in general I was mostly just in my dorm getting my homework done with my partner, and that was a really useful quarter because it really showed me how to put my head down and just kind of get all my stuff done. And that quarter I ended up getting 1A and 2A minuses. The 1A was in my computer science class, CS 106A. My spring quarter, I went ahead and took the next computer science course, CS 106B, which was programming abstractions. And on top of that, I also ended up taking the next physics course, which was electricity and magnetism. And also every Stanford freshman needs to take this writing course, which is called Power. And there's a bunch of different variations of it where every course has the same essays that people need to write, but there's different variations that focus on different topics. So I took my power course, and that ended up being my best quarter. I ended up getting straight A's that quarter, which is super nice. So that concludes my freshman year, and looking back, it was cool because I was able to ramp up a little bit. I had the worst quarter for my freshman year on the first quarter, then I did better my winter quarter, and then I did even better my spring quarter. So it was nice to see the progression. It was nice to see that I was just like ramping up a little bit, and I felt confident. But at this point, I remember seeing that a lot of people had already come into Stanford knowing how to program a bit, and they had already taken like 1 or 2 of the Stanford core classes. So I was starting to feel like a little bit behind. So the next quarter, as I mentioned in the previous video, I ended up loading up on a ton of Stanford core classes, which usually people won't take more than 2. I ended up taking 3. I guess a ton is the wrong thing to say, but I took 3 where most people recommend taking 1, maybe 2. So I ended up taking CS 107, which was the first computer systems course, which basically talked about, it was basically a class on C and pointers, and like the final assignment was making a heap allocator. And I also took CS 103, which was like the mathematical foundations of computer science. And I also took CS 109, which was basically like a probability and statistics course, like merged with computer science fundamentals or whatever. So it was basically like the typical type of questions that you might see in a stats class, but applied to computer science topics. Like, for example, what's the probability of getting a bucket collision when you're adding something to a hash map, or stuff like that. So in this course, I'll put up my transcript. You can see that my original grade for all 3 of those classes were I's for incomplete because I wasn't able to take my finals that quarter. I have a whole separate video on this that I'll link in the description so you guys can check out why that was the case. But basically, once I was able to complete them in different quarters, I ended up doing, this was probably my worst quarter at Stanford, which was still completely fine. You guys can see I got a B in CS 107, which was the C course. I got a B+ in the Mathematical Foundations course, and I ended up getting an A in the Probability and Stats course. So all things considered, everything that I went through that quarter, it still ended up being very good. And coming out of that, I knew that, hey, if I did this well, given the circumstances, then I know that I'm fine. And now I feel caught up on the core, and I can just keep on going and taking classes that I find are interesting. So at this point, I took 3 pretty theoretical or low-level classes. I took a class on C, and I took 2 math classes. So at this point, I felt comfortable in my ability to program a bit and debug a bit, but I didn't really have any more practical skills. So I took this class on object-oriented design, which is basically a class on Java and a little bit of Android programming. So this is my sophomore winter quarter. This class was called CS 108. For this class, it was really interesting because we got to code a bunch of stuff like a Sudoku solver. We learned a little bit of about threading. We also coded our own game of Tetris. And at the very end, the final project was this group project where we had to make this game called Bunny World, which basically was an application where you could do 2 things. You could either edit and make your own world, and then you can play through that world. And that was really fun because it was like my first big team project. There was like 5 of us working on that project. And it was cool to learn how to use like Git a little bit, and like how to communicate as a team, and how to divide up work a little bit. And it was also cool because it was like working on an Android app, so it was cool to be able to just see code that you run be used on a phone. So besides that class on object-oriented systems design, I also took like the classic computer science course, design and analysis of algorithms, and I ended up not doing as well in this class as I was in others. I ended up getting a B in this class, which is still completely fine, but it's also like a little bit ironic that this is the class that I didn't do as well on, given that if you want to be a software engineer, this class basically goes over the type of problems that you're going to encounter in a job interview, like sorting algorithms or even dynamic programming if you get a hard question or stuff like that. I did fine on the homework, I did fine on the final project, but we had one test that made up most of our grade, and it just wasn't one of my good test days, and I didn't end up doing very well on that test, but it ended up being fine. So yeah, I took those two courses and also one last writing course that Stanford requires sophomores to take. It's basically another power course, and it's pretty much the exact same thing as the first one, but this one has a bit more emphasis on public speaking a little bit. So yeah, so that quarter ended up being fine. I got 2 A's and then the 1 B. Going forward, my spring quarter, I had to take the last course of the Stanford core, which is known for being the more difficult one, which is CS 110. Course is Principles of Computer Systems. So this is basically the course where you finally start learning about like processes and multi-threading and networking a little bit. Basically anything that goes like into the system side, you get like a top level view of everything. And I ended up really liking this class. I ended up doing pretty well. I got an A in it. And what I liked the most of this course is that at the end of the course, the professor took one lecture to just talk about more upper level computer science courses and give an overview of what a degree in computer science with a systems track might look like. On top of that, I took this class called Germany in 5 words because I had heard that CS 110 was going to be a lot of work, and this class wasn't supposed to be too much work, and it would knock out a general education requirement, and I had some friends taking it, so I decided why not. And I also took this linear algebra course that I didn't need to take, but I had heard a lot of people say that if you want to do something like artificial intelligence and whatnot, which I was thinking about maybe wanting to do that, you usually need a pretty strong foundation in linear algebra. And this course was called Applied Matrix Methods or something like that, but the course ended up being not very applied, and basically the final was just like practically write out the textbook, and I don't know, I just didn't really have that good of an experience in the class. Eventually I just saw that I didn't really like math that much. Like, the material was really hard. The people that took the courses were super on top of their stuff. They knew a lot of everything, and basically like the curves on the exams were tough, so I ended up just taking that course for credit, no credit, because I thought that maybe I could get like a C on it, which, you know, isn't terrible, but I didn't need this class to graduate, so I could just take a credit, no credit, and that would be fine. It didn't affect my GPA at all. So yeah, so that quarter I got an A in CS 110. I got credit for the linear algebra course, and I ended up getting an A- in the Germany in 5 words class. So at this point, I'm done with my sophomore year. I had to start thinking about what kind of track I wanted to do. I was between systems and artificial intelligence. So the next quarter, I took one systems course, one artificial intelligence course, and I also took this course on computer graphics, mainly because Stanford has like this general education requirement for an art class, and that graphics course satisfied the art requirement. For example, I'll show right here, me and my partner made this ray traced image, and you got credit for making the image like aesthetically appealing. It wasn't that much of a technical class. It was more of like an art class. I kind of got inspired by, in San Francisco, I remember seeing this bench with see no evil, speak no evil, hear no evil monkeys, and I thought, oh, it'd be pretty fun to try to recreate that with graphics. And so I did, and I ended up getting an A in that class. And I also took the intro artificial intelligence class that Stanford offers, CS 221. It didn't go super into the math too much, and I ended up doing like okay on the midterm. And for my final project, me and my partner made these regression models that would try to predict whether or not an NFL game would be an over or under in terms of like Vegas betting. That course was cool. I got an A- on that, and I ended up taking this class on like databases and storage, which was also pretty fun. It was like more low-level system stuff, how to store data, how data is retrieved efficiently, like using indexes and stuff. And so it was cool to be able to see how everything happens behind the scenes, but it wasn't like super interesting. But I ended up doing good in that class also, and I ended up getting an A in that class. So going forward to my winter quarter of my junior year, I ended up taking Stanford's operating systems course, which is known for being really hard and taking a lot of time. But I ended up taking it because even though I wasn't sure if I wanted to fully be a systems track, I knew that because I did well in CS 110, I I could probably do okay in CS 140, and I decided like, okay, I should just take this. Worst case, if I don't do too well in it, I can just take a credit or no credit. It won't affect my GPA, and I can just do artificial intelligence and I'll be completely fine. And so that course was cool because you basically work on one operating system. This was called Pintos, with a group of up to three people including me. So it was cool to get close with the group again, like get used to using GitHub more, which was like useful in my summer internships. This class was awesome because I felt like it took me to the next level in terms of being able to look at big code bases and try to like understand everything step by step and not feel super overwhelmed when I have like this big project ahead of me. So yeah, even though that class was hard, a lot of all-nighters spent, I walked out of it learning a lot. I walked out of it making connections with a couple of other really hardworking engineers, and that was really cool. I ended up getting an A- in that class, which was really good because it made me feel like, okay, I can do this. This is what people say is like the hardest course. I ended up getting an A- on it. So from here on out, like I know that I can do whatever class comes up. But I also knew that I pretty much already had a job lined up and that I didn't necessarily need to have a systems track, and I could just do artificial intelligence, which isn't really quite as time demanding, and I could just spend more of my college time like just enjoying time with my friends and whatnot. That winter quarter, because I knew CS 140 was going to take a lot of time, I decided to take 2 other general education classes. So in general, I think that this is a good theme. If you know that you have a class that's supposed to be really hard that you need to take, you should definitely try to pair it up with like other classes that are known for not being too hard, so that way you don't burn yourself too much. You can focus your time on the hard class, and then you can walk out of the class like knowing that you had all the time that you needed to like fully do the work and learn everything, instead of just trying to get by because you have all these other classes that you need to worry about. So the other classes that I took was this class on John Steinbeck, which is pretty cool because in high school I read like East of Eden and Grapes of Wrath, and I really liked them. And I figured, hey, maybe I could read some other John Steinbeck books and get some credit for it. And it was also cool because John Steinbeck is a Stanford alum. Actually, I'm not sure if he graduated, but he went to Stanford. It was cool to talk about that history and like what the campus was like back when he was a student. So yeah, I took that class, and I also took this class on like the ethics of technology, pretty much. It's called STS1, where STS stands for Science, Technology, and Society. So it's basically how like technology and science like impacts the world around us, like the ethics of it, the ethics of science, the ethics of like publishing papers and whatnot. And so that was pretty cool. That class also had like a discussion section where we just go in and talk about stuff. So for that class, I got an A. For the Steinbeck class, I got an A-, and for the operating systems class, I got an A-. And now I was feeling a little burnt out after this quarter because operating systems took a long time, so I ended up taking a course load that was a lot lighter. So this was my spring of my junior year. I took this class called CS 230, which is a deep learning class taught by Andrew Ng. And this class is pretty famous at Stanford because Andrew Ng is known very well for deep learning and all the research that he's done on it. And the thing about this class though is that it's pretty much just a Coursera course. There isn't really any homework. You just kind of watch some videos on Coursera and then answer some quiz questions, which you can have like more than one opportunity to answer. And so the homework itself wasn't really that time demanding, and you could just like cram for like 2 days for the exam, and you could usually slide by with like a median grade, which like I mentioned before is like a B+ or A- equivalent. So that was fine. But at this point, I was really into NBA 2K, the video game, and me and my partners for that class figured like, hey, like deep learning is pretty cool, computer vision is pretty cool, why don't we just apply it to NBA 2K? And we ended up making this bot that could take the visual output of the Xbox, process like where the ball and like players and opponents were, and try to make the best decision of what controller inputs to give to try to score a basket and like do well. And like the bot didn't end up being super cool, but like as you guys will see here, I'll put a video up of it actually like scoring and just like playing it by itself. So that was really cool because it was basically an excuse to like play 2K all quarter. And I'll put here also like that project ended up being one of the final prize winners of all the projects that quarter. So it was really cool. It was super fun, worked on something that we wanted to, and we ended up getting a little bit of recognition for it. So I ended up getting an A in the class, and I also took more general education classes that I needed to take. I took like moral philosophy, and also I took this class on the identity of Native Americans in the 21st century. Both of the classes were super interesting, in particular the class on Native American identities, because it was just really interesting and really eye-opening to really see how these like group of people were portrayed in movies historically in America and how inaccurate that kind of stuff was. and just like the inequities in terms of like the food that they kind of have to eat. And it was really cool to be able to sit down and study that stuff in more of like an academic environment. I remember we read this book called Tribe, which is really interesting because it talked about how important a sense of community was to humans. It talked about how a lot of like people that went through times of war, like even civilians, like in England when there was a ton of bombings and they had to live in shelters with communities, how those people after the war ended felt kind of sad or maybe like depressed that life had gone back to normal, but they were like separated from that community that they felt a part of. Even though they were safer now, they felt like they weren't as happy because they didn't feel like they were a part of something. And it was really cool to get out of the computer a little bit, out of the programming, and just like talk about stuff that really matters. Talk about ideas that you might not get in a computer, that you definitely won't get in a computer science course. So I ended up getting an A- in moral philosophy and an A in the Native American class. So yeah, that concludes my junior year. And then I came back my senior year. At this point, I just needed 2 more courses to finish the systems track, and I also needed a few more to complete the artificial intelligence track. But I ended up thinking that I was going to go through with the artificial intelligence track, mostly because the systems track involves this class, compilers, which I had heard was really hard, and I don't know, I was feeling a little bit burnt out. I had already had a job lined up. I didn't need to take this class, and I could just go through the artificial intelligence courses and have like a bit of an easier time and just enjoy my senior year. So my fall quarter, I took a few artificial intelligence courses. I took machine learning with graphs. I took this class mostly because I'm going to be working at Twitter, and I figured that a lot of the algorithms that you learn in this class might be pretty applicable to how social media graph networks might work, and applying machine learning to them seemed like an interesting idea. And I had some friends taking it, so I ended up going through with that class. And I also took this class called Decision Making Under Uncertainty, which was basically more of like a game theory class with like applications of artificial intelligence, which was pretty cool. I also took this other general education class to make sure that I had time for the other courses. This class was called 10 Poems That Would Change Your Life, and it was like a German class, which taught in English, but the poems were from German authors that were translated into English. And so that was a nice course because it just helped be creative a bit and like recite poems and then just talk to people about stuff that wasn't computers and meet some people outside of your bubble. So that was really cool. And that quarter I also took this class, this 1-unit class, Personal Finance for Engineers, because I knew that in the coming year I would be starting my job, I would start to make some money, and I wanted to make sure that I didn't really know anything about like investing or saving or really anything about that. So I took the course, and that was really useful so that I could be prepared on how to save my money, invest my money once I started actually making it. I got a B+ on the machine learning on graphs class, and I got an A in the decision under uncertainty class, and also an A in the 10 poems that would change your life class. So now going on to the winter quarter of that year, I had just gotten out of taking these 2 artificial intelligence classes, but I didn't really like them that much. And I found this course called CS 190, which was this class on software design, but you had to apply to get into it. But I saw that it satisfied a requirement in the systems track, and so if I took that class, I would only need to take compilers. So I told myself like, okay, I'm just gonna apply for this class. If I get in, then I'll go through with it, and then I'll just take compilers. And if I don't get in, I'll just finish the artificial intelligence track, and that'll be that. But I applied, I ended up getting in, and this, in terms of what's going to help me in my career, definitely ended up being the most useful class, because a lot of the CS systems courses are really low level. You program in C, C++, which might not be stuff that you'll necessarily work on in industry. But while this software design class was also in C++, it mostly focused on topics like worrying about shallow versus deep classes. It focused on like making code readable, the importance on comments, and the projects were pretty big. We ended up doing this, we had to implement, for example, like this raft concurrency algorithm. There was like these like 2,000 line projects with one partner, and you start completely from scratch, which is different from other classes where you had a code base that you were given, and you couldn't really use any libraries. And so this class took a ton of time. I remember being stuck in the cluster with my partner for a lot of time, and but we walked out of it knowing a lot more. We had to present on our design decisions and argue why they were good, why they were bad. And so getting up in front of people and like talking about why design is good or bad, it was super useful, because you do that stuff when working in industry. And on top of that, just being in the lab a bit and just like coding for hours and having to communicate with a partner and drawing stuff on the whiteboard, that's just stuff that's really useful. It's actual experience that can be applicable. and I was really glad that I took that course. I got an A- in that class. And besides that course, I also took this course that was like called like Intro into Making, which was like this engineering course that all computer science majors have to take. You learn about circuits and stuff, and you build stuff like a solar powered iPhone charger, stuff like that, which is pretty cool. But at that point, it felt like busy work, and I was kind of more looking towards learning stuff that was going to help me in my job. But I had to take it, so I took it. And that class has like 3-hour labs every week, so, and like problem sets and like exams. It was like an intro course like a freshman year that you take, which might not be super difficult as a senior, but it's time consuming. So I knew that I was taking that class and the software design class, which is supposed to take a lot of time. So I ended up deciding to take a more chill class, but that would be like impactful and interesting. And I ended up taking this class called Well-Being in Immigrant Children and Youth, a service learning course. So this was as I said, a service learning course where we learn a bit about immigrant families. Particularly this class was on like Latino or Latina families, and on top about learning about their struggles, learning about their risk factors, learning about protection factors, that kind of stuff. It was a small course. There weren't many like computer science engineers, which was great to get out of that bubble a little bit and kind of just like discuss as a class about this stuff. And on top of that, it's a service learning course. So once a week, I would go to this trailer park in Palo Alto and go there and tutor some kids on whatever math or science or reading homework that they might have. And towards the end of it, I ended up tutoring, I remember, this grandma of one of the kids there who was taking this English course but was struggling a bit on her homework because she mostly only knew Spanish, and I'm bilingual, I know Spanish, so I ended up trying to help her a little bit with her English homework. And that just felt super rewarding. It felt good to like get out of the computer cluster a bit from all the software design stuff and get out of the electrical engineering lab and just like go somewhere where in the real world where stuff is actually happening. People might need some more help, and just kind of get to know those people and help them in any way that I could. So at this point, this ended up being my last quarter at Stanford. My next and last quarter at Stanford was when the pandemic started happening. And because of that, Stanford went away from grading with letter grades, and they went to grading on credit, no credit for every class. And this was to help the fact that all students were now going back to their homes, and some people might not have the proper work environment to do well in a class. For example, some students at Stanford might come from really rich families where they can just go home, they'll have their own room to just study and not have to worry about anything, whereas other people at home might be sharing with a bunch of siblings and not really have a quiet place where they can study. So they just went with credit, no credit, so that way people still have to do their work and make sure that they pass, but they won't be penalized for doing the equivalent of C work versus the A work that they could have done if they had the proper environment back at Stanford. So because it was credit, no credit, I decided to take a few more courses than I might usually. So to graduate, I just needed to take my senior project class and compilers. So I ended up taking compilers, which was, as expected, a lot of work, but it was nice knowing that I could just get like a C and I'd be fine. And I ended up partnering with my partner from the software design class, so we already kind of knew each other, and he was really hardworking, so he was really great to work with, and I kind of just put my head down and got through that course. And the senior project course was also really fun because I got to work on another group of like 5 really hardworking people, and we ended up making this project, which was basically just like this calendar planner where you could like list activities that you did throughout the day and just kind of give a journal entry and like the mood that you had for that day. And that was really fun because although the product itself, it didn't end up being very complex, a lot of us didn't really have that much experience making a web application. So a lot of that time went into learning how to use frameworks like React and getting more used to JavaScript, Express, stuff like that. So it was really cool to be able to work with the team and like present and like look at what other teams were building. And it was overall just a fun experience. And on top of that, I took this class that I didn't need to take, but I thought could be really useful and helpful because a lot of the time I spent in artificial intelligence courses and in systems courses, those courses didn't really teach you how to build like a web app. They didn't teach you how to build like an iPhone app. A lot of stuff that you might use in software engineering. It didn't teach you like front-end programming, back-end programming, that kind of stuff. So I decided to take this class called just web applications that my roommate had took the quarter before. I saw kind of like what they were doing and it seemed really useful. And like the end product for this was making this photo sharing website where you could like make a user, make an account, and you could upload photos, comment on photos, you have like an activity feed, and it was just really cool to be able to see how all that stuff worked, how it came together. So on top of those 3 computer science courses, I also needed to take one last science requirement course. So I ended up taking this human behavioral biology course, which was super interesting. I think that a previous iteration of the course, the videos for the lectures are like on YouTube. So I guess you guys could just look up like Stanford Bio 150 lectures if you guys want to check it out. It's super interesting. Basically, like, the class just kind of culminates to where this professor talks about why humans don't really have free will, and like this illusion of free will is just kind of stuff that is like a biological concept that we just haven't really like explained yet. This was the one quarter where I took 4 like main like STEM classes, so it was really busy. Everything was locked down, so I had to stay home, and it was kind of hard because I was just kind of in my room watching lectures, then working on stuff. But it was super rewarding. I got through it. I ended up working on a bunch of projects that were super rewarding. One thing that I forgot to mention is that I came in with some AP credit that was super useful, so I didn't have to take Calculus 1 or 2. And on top of that, I had AP credit for Spanish. At Stanford, you have to take a full year of a language, so I didn't have to do that, which was super nice. That concludes me going through my 4 years at Stanford. I really hope that me talking through everything is super useful to someone. If you guys found this useful, I really appreciate it if you guys like the video so that this video could find other people who might find it useful. And on top of that, I appreciate if you guys subscribe. And I'm curious to hear about where you guys are at. If you guys are in high school, what your kind of dreams are, what you're trying to work towards. If you guys are in college, which college are you going to, and what are you working towards? And yeah, just in general, I really hope that you guys have a good day. I appreciate you guys watching this video, and subscribe for more content like this. I really hope this was helpful. See you guys.